Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good morning, good day, good evening, good night to everyone out there. I am Ellen Wagner. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm tuning in from Princeton, New Jersey, the United States, from the East Coast. And I am the founder and CEO of Cross Cultural Bridges. And today I'm hosting this conversation room with the title White Adjacency. And you see, Athena, I learned to pronounce this word, this term. The first time it was really hard. It took me a while. So if you stumbled across this title thinking, what does that mean? I've never heard about it. I hope today's conversation will help you understand much better. And this is a room where we all learn and where we all are open to learning. So, first of all, I'd like to say a trigger warning. We will talk about racism and other forms of oppression, probably. So, if you don't feel, oh, this is too much, please just mute the volume or take a break, and just be aware that we will be talking about our personal experiences, or we're going to share experiences of other people, or marginalized people, or racialized people, and that might be hurtful or painful for some. Okay. And today's conversation should probably last about an hour. Let's see how long we're going to hang in there. I was just dancing to this countdown, which I love here, the first 30 seconds, and I'm starting to sweat. I'm getting short breath because currently I'm building humans. I'm pregnant. So bear with me if I need to take a break from sometimes. And I'm going to drink a lot and I'm going to take a lot of breaks. But I think this is a very inclusive way to take it slow this time here. And I'm not alone here. I know that some folks out there are tuning in live, and you can use the chat box or the comment box and interact with us. So I want to test this and see if it works. If you are watching us live now, please just type in from where you're dialing in from, and maybe just the country and the city. And you can also share your name. Sometimes we cannot see it and just see a different username. Somebody is writing, hello, everybody. So hello back. And this way you can interact with us throughout this conversation room. This shouldn't be a one-way street. It's not just us talking and having this conversation here. You can also share your questions or your concerns or your thoughts with us, and then we can respond to that. So it's Coley. I hope I pronounced it correctly, dialing in from France. Bonjour. And Monica Kim, hello. So nice that you're here. And please use the comment function. If you agree, you can also put some emojis and clap. Or if you disagree, just let us know. Okay? And you are out there, I hear, I'm here, but I'm not alone. There are more people to come. There's Frank and Athena with me today. And before I talk too much, I would just hand it over. Frank, let's go first with you because you're next in line here on my Zoom, or not on my Zoom screen, on my screen here. And maybe just introduce yourself for everybody who doesn't know you yet.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Frank, Frank Jong, or Frank Jong in German, and I'm dialing in from Berlin. I'm a freelance journalist and a podcast host. My podcast's name is Halbe Kartoffel, so half potato, where I talk to people or talk to Germans who have non-German roots. So my parents are from Korea, but I was born and raised in Germany. Right. So
There's more
I
to say, right?
yeah,
But
there's
yeah.
lots to say, but I don't want to bore the people just in the beginning, so I just hand it over to Athena.
Thank you, Frank. So, yeah, I'm Athena Lam, and I currently am a senior content manager at Pitch, based in Berlin. I came here by way of Hong Kong and long time ago, Canada. I haven't lived there for a very long time, but I do frequent there. And I've kind of floated around the tech industry for a while. I also dabble in a lot of open source projects, community projects, and also a little bit of social justice work here and there. So I am joining this conversation wearing all of those hats. And I'll hand the mic back over to you, Ellen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and people may be wondering how come that you three people come together and want to share your thoughts about this topic that Ellen has trouble pronouncing. So I know Athena longer, I think, let's say personally at least. And we got in touch, I think, through Pitch, through your company, yeah, where Cross-Cultural Bridges, my company, created a slide deck introducing LGBTQI topics. I guess that was it. And if you want to know more about these educational series of very nice slide decks that, educate and show different perspectives, contact Athena. I think you can reach Athena through LinkedIn. Just type in the name and then you find Athena. And since then we are frequently in contact. And I really appreciate that, over the Atlantic. And Frank, you're also in Berlin. I know everybody who's hip is in Berlin. And I remember the day you sent an email to me, and I was reading Frank wanted to do a podcast with me. And it was the day after I recorded a different podcast with another person. And this person really kind of triggered me throughout the podcast. It was a white person. And this podcast was about what are we allowed to say. And then I was just a little exhausted answering all the same questions over and over again about racism. And then there comes Frank asking me if I want to do a podcast about diversity. And I'm like, oh, not another white Frank. And then the last sentence, you said something, I'm also the host of Halbe Kartoffel. And I'm like, oh, so Frank is
That
not the
Frank.
Frank I would have imagined. There you
The
see.
Korean Frank.
This is how I get socialized. I read a name and I have a certain stereotype in mind. All right. I'm outing myself already. So here we are. And I said, yes, of course. So there's a nice episode with me, a little advertisement on the side, although in German, with Frank and myself. And and some more folks are chiming in. Thank you so much. And I think, Athena, we talked first, and I thought, hey, would you like to do a conversation room with me? Because you have a lot to say and a lot of opinions, and I love that. What can we talk about? And then I think you were talking definitely about racism, right? This direction, and being a person of color, but there are differences between different groups of persons of color. So if we take the term BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, it includes, or it distinguish between different groups of people of color. There are Black people, and there are Indigenous people, and there are people of color, meaning everybody who's not white and who's experiencing racism. And would any one of you like to go first to try to explain the term white adjacency? And maybe I'm looking at you, Athena, because you suggested it.
I threw out the bomb, the tongue-twisting bomb. So I do think this term is something that might be a little bit more resonant in North America, where there are many more recent immigrant populations from different places, and also different waves of immigration. So even for myself, I look Chinese, I do speak Chinese, I do identify culturally Chinese on top of being Canadian. Even as a Chinese person in Canada, you could be 5th generation, 4th generation, you could have come during the gold rush in San Francisco and migrated up to Vancouver. You could be a first generation or 1.5 generation, moved here when you were in, let's say, preschool or early elementary. And all of these experiences will shape you, and it will shape how you move about the world. And so one of the things that does happen, I think, in North America is that there's the idea of the model minority. And this is where I think it's really interesting to talk to Frank, because I talked to another friend who pointed out to me that in Europe, there's no such thing as a model minority. Everyone's just equally oppressed if you're not white. And I'm new to Europe. So for me, it was more of like a hierarchy. And as a model minority, as an East Asian, and as someone who looks pretty pale skinned on top of that, I have what I would say a lot of white adjacency. I was also socialized middle class and all sorts of other things that make me a little bit closer, and in some senses makes my life a little bit more comfortable. So I was talking to Ellen about that and about the responsibility that I think those of us who do end up having these sorts of privileges, even though we may identify as BIPOC in one way or another, to think about that, and to give back to the community and to have solidarity with those who don't have access to the same privileges.
You put that so nice, in such a nice way. Thank you so much. And if you talk about role minority, or did you say role model minority? What does that
model
mean?
minority. Yeah. So a model minority is, again, I think like also a very North American concept, in that a lot of East Asians are seen. And when I say East Asians, usually this is very specifically, I think, the Japanese and then the Chinese ethnic groups, and then by extension, potentially Korean communities as well, or people who are read that way. And so these, when you think in North America and you think of an East Asian, you think of someone who's really good at math, really studious, is not going to break any windows. And so these are the ideal kind of people to have. They are smart, they're hardworking, they don't cause trouble, and they allow this white supremacy to continue. And in that sense, we facilitate it as well, because we help grow the economy without actually subverting the structures, and being inserted between white folks and everyone underneath. Then we are helping to replicate those systems of inequality with people who, for whatever reason, have been placed socially beneath us. Not to say that they should be, but for example, like if you are walking through a street as a person who is read as Black, you are going to experience the world in a very different way. And and you will also have many different stereotypes associated with you, true or otherwise. You will not be associated with that idea of the model minority. Mm-hmm. So that's the model minority construct. And of course, it's true. It's untrue. It's false. But it's something that has given almost like half a seat at the table to people, to a certain group of people.
And because of these stereotypes, because there is no way to escape them if we watch media, if we watch movies, if we watch Disney movies. I'm always talking from a perspective of being a mother. I see in the children's books and movies how people get portrayed. So there's no way around us to not think in these stereotypes. And the worst part of it is that we adjust to these stereotypes to cater to the white comfort. And the moment we leave this role, or we are different, it's a complete disaster. People cannot handle it and people cannot cope with it. And it takes so much energy to convince them otherwise. Frank, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. I just have to put them into words. But I mean, the first thing I thought was that we here in Germany, we don't have terms for the whole thing. So I just learned the last 5 to 6 years all about the the terms regarding racism and discrimination, like BIPOC or I don't know, white comfort, white fragility, things like that. So, and I think it's hard to speak about things when you don't have any words for it. So, growing up in Germany when I was younger and talking to other halbe Kartoffeln, half potatoes, then we just had feelings, right? We had just feelings, and we didn't know what kind of feelings we had and why we have it. And now we have more and more words for it. There are English words, English expressions, and we have to, like white adjacency, we have to look it up, you know, and see what's going on there. But I think it's compared to North America, it's a very new experience here, just to talk about it, to debate it. So I'm just wrapping my head around the things you said, like the model minority and debate in the US and Canada is, is older than we have it here. So I think we are just at the beginning of it.
Well, I think may I jump in, Ellen?
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, but I want to ask you, Frank, like, I loved how you very specifically said that these are English terms, because on the one hand, you could say maybe it was helpful to skip maybe 100 years of thinking around this and debating around this. And on the other hand, you're receiving this through another type of inequality, and you could even say imperialism in some ways, which is like a cultural imperialism and the center of the US and North America on places even like Germany. So I'm very curious, even though it's a newer term for you, if you have any feelings about this kind of import into German social discussions, I suppose.
So you talk about specifically the term white adjacency, or
Yeah, like the white adjacency, but also just in general, things like BIPOC. Like, for example, I don't even know if BIPOC is entirely relevant in Germany. Like, I don't know if there are indigenous folks here.
There are some,
Okay.
but it's a very small number, I think. Well, I mean, when I started the podcast, I really had no idea about all this. And then talking to people and talking about the whole topic, more and more terms, more and more expressions came up. And I was like, oh, there is an expression for my feelings. There's an expression for this structure or this this experience. And I was, on the one hand, I was amazed that there is an expression for it, and on the other hand, I was shocked that nobody knew about it in Germany, and that we not even have this in German. So, like halbe Kartoffel, right? I mean, we don't have an expression, an official expression for people like me, who are red Asian or red, not white, but are Germans. So we say Germans with a migration background. But when I was young, I was just a Ausländer. I was just a immigrant, right? And I was born here. I was raised here. I speak German fluently, but I was not German. So I think it's important to have expressions and to have like theories about it, data, and history. And it's not an individual feeling. It's not an individual experience. So I think when I talk to people about growing up in Germany, almost everybody says I felt alone. I felt I'm the only one that feels like this. Everybody around me was laughing about jokes. Everybody was saying the same things. And I just didn't feel well. But I had no words. I had no company. I had no community. I had no people who had the words for me. So I think a lot of people right now, through podcasts, through movies, through all the debates that we have, are experiencing the feeling of, oh, I wasn't alone, or I'm not alone. And the feeling that I have is not me. It's not only me. It's a lot of people. And I think this is very powerful and very empowering as well.
Yes, and in Germany, you're talking about data. There is no data. In
Yeah.
North America, you at least you have a little bit of data. You can say, I just know like 13% of the population are Black and so forth. And in Germany, there is no such thing. People know there are 25% of people with Migrationshintergrund, with a background of migration, which means that you yourself or your parents have migrated. But there are so many other people like me. I'm adopted, got white parents. I'm not migrated. So I feel German. And still, I get put in this one box. And over the past years, the language is slowly changing. Still, you hear something like Fremdenfeindlichkeit, and it's not said racism. And you cannot be, what is the English word for it? um, there's a term for it if you are hostile towards people
Like
with a foreign
xenophobia,
background.
like xenophobia.
Xenophobia, exactly. That
Xenophobia.
is the term. You cannot be xenophobic towards people who are not strangers in the country. But no matter what you look like, yeah, you always get put in the same box. Athena.
Yeah, you raise a really good point, and I think that's one of the nuances in specific, maybe in Germany or in Western Europe even. I can't speak for Western Europe. I haven't lived in other places, but one of the things I do get very often here in Germany when I speak to, for example, friends who are Slovenian, Slovakian, people from Eastern Europe, from the Balkans, they will say, if I am talking about racism, their immediate response is going to be, oh, but the Germans are equally discriminatory to everyone. I'm like, yes, yes. But there's a difference between, if you have two people who don't open their mouths on the street and someone walks by, it's much more likely that someone who looks Black or is read as Black is probably going to get some sort of comment or experience some remark or worse than if you are blonde hair, blue-eyed, and yes, you might have come from a different country in Europe. So that's the big difference, I think, in Germany especially. The difference between xenophobia and racism still needs to be disentangled. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Frank, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to more than 100 people in my podcast, and it's pretty easy to say, or it's pretty accurate, I think, to say that the more Germans feel that other people are or look strange to them, or like strangers to them.
You mean white Germans?
Yeah, white Germans. White Germans. Oh, okay, let me put it another way. So the more you seem to be not from here, you look different. The more you look different, the more you probably be is seen as a stranger, and as so far experience racism. So I think you're totally right, Athena, that when you doesn't have, you might have a migration background, but if you don't have a migration foreground, like
If it's not visible,
it's
right?
not visible, then people will treat you like a white person, maybe, right? So yeah, I mean, you can see it in the war between Russia and Ukraine. So you have all these Ukrainian people walking around, and nobody can, really tell, oh, that he's or she's from the Ukraine. And just imagine all the people from this country had black hair, or black skin, then I think it would be very different. Situation
Yeah.
would be very different, and the reaction as well.
And you
Well,
see,
sorry.
go ahead, Athena.
Well, specific to Ukraine as well, I think you raise a good point, Frank. So one of the things that happened in Berlin, for example, which became a place where many people transited at least through, even if they didn't stay from Ukraine. Like you said, you have white Ukrainians who go through and they get all the access to all of the refugee statuses. And then you had situations where a lot of people who, many of them are foreign students. So for example, the people that I hosted, they're originally from another country in Africa. And for them, it wasn't clear whether they would get their title of residence or their right to stay. And on top of that, in Kreuzberg, in certain areas in Berlin, you had increased police surveillance, basically, because there was this influx of people. So why is there all of this profiling when these people already have enough that they have lost? So that is a very recent example of how you have an influx of people, but even then it's not equal who has access to what resources.
Yes, exactly. And Athena, you lived in many countries like Hong Kong, Canada, Germany. Which different challenges did you experience there?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Huge question.
I'll preface all of the critiques with the fact that I did also enjoy all of the places that I have stayed, and I've been fortunate in that respect. And part of the reason that I have been able to enjoy it is also because of a class background. So I am very comfortably middle class. I currently work in tech. So I am in an extremely mobile industry earning pretty decent money. And that makes it easier for me to say good things about wherever I go. So with that, my experiences of challenges in the different places are extremely different because the constellation of my identity, what you can visibly see, will manifest differently in Canada versus, for example, Hong Kong. So a really stark example is in Hong Kong, I don't look like I'm from elsewhere. I basically look white because I am in a Chinese dominant society, a Han Chinese dominant society, and I speak the language as well. And so I always joke that I know how it feels to be white, because when I was walking around there, I never had to worry about my safety. If police were walking around, I knew they wouldn't target me. They would target the person that was standing beside me, who looks like they're from Southeast Asia, but could have equally been born here or in Hong Kong. And in contrast, in Canada or likewise in Germany, because of the way I look, people will immediately want to come up to me and ask me where I'm from. They might want to speak to me in Chinese. They might want to shout a few words of Japanese at me. So these are experiences that cannot be separated from the geographies that I've lived. And the final thing that I'll say, because I can say a lot about all of the places, is that Canada is definitely not as good as its PR. It is an incredibly racist country. And it's just very good at hiding it. And I think one of the things that I cannot really decide, not ever having lived in the US, is which one's worse. Because Canada's excuse for everything that it does is, at least we are not like the US, we do not have guns. Or we do not make guns easy to legally buy, I should say. But that is an extremely low bar for a civilized society, in my opinion. So I think that basically tells you, in some ways, all you need to know about Canada. In contrast,
I'm very upset now.
Sorry?
Because I'm very upset. We were thinking about moving to Canada for some of these reasons.
Well,
but keep talking.
we might circle back to this part of this conversation, because Canada is also an incredibly comfortable place for many people
Yeah.
to immigrate to. It's extremely comfortable if you have money. So one of the things, for example, a lot of Chinese people will say, oh, I can see actually a bit of disclosure. I do have a high school friend joining our call. So
Hi there.
this high school friend could probably at least sense check whether what I'm saying feels accurate and true. So um, with Canada, you know, if you have enough money, you can have access to good food. You can buy a big house, and the joke amongst a lot of Chinese, for example, because there are a fair number of Chinese who do emigrate there, is that you can move there and never have to speak the language. And that is a selling point. The fact that you can completely export your whole life and transplant it into another country. But if you think about that, that's only because you have the ability to buy everything you need and to protect yourself within that. And that's a very different circumstance to someone who might be migrating to Canada truly for work, or if they're fleeing war or something like that. And I'll stop there. But yeah, so depending on where you're moving to and for what, it can be an extremely different experience. And that leads us back to the topic of, I think, white adjacency, in that if you are not mindful of the situation and of the environment that you've naturally created for yourself with your privileges, then you will not look around and notice how other people may live in a parallel universe to you, even though they might only be 2 meters away from you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. You cannot assume anything. You can maybe, according to skin color, assume how bad this person is experiencing racism. But I also know many people who experience probably racism, well, must do, but they don't recognize it because they gaslight themselves, or they just don't know the terms, like Frank said before. And my wife and I we're thinking about, what could be the next station. So we are originally from Germany, born and raised, and we like to travel the world, lived in different countries. Now we live in the US, which we really like. This little bubble here in Princeton, New Jersey, which is very safe because we can pay for the safety, right? We have a nice school district. Our daughter is having a good school and everything because we are super privileged, because we both work and we have access to a lot of resources. But the reality for many other people who are Black, who might be biracial, who might be in a same-sex relationship, if you go a little bit more to the suburban places, maybe in Pennsylvania, it's a completely different thing. And it's so sad that if I think about what are the countries where we could live, there are not too many. There are like 50 countries where homosexuality is a crime and where you're going to be punished or end up in prison. And then there are, I don't know if there's any country that is free from racism. I think no. And it's hard to choose. And Frank, what I wanted to ask you, and Athena also said she felt white. And before you said you were struggling with a German person, and then you said a white German person, and then you yourself said something like, if you look different, and you othered yourself, right? So the narrative that we all have is, if you look different, we do not look different. We look like people who could be Germans, but that is the thing. We still think in Germany that people who are originally from, what is originally from Germany? That they are Germans, that they are white. For you, what does white mean? Can you explain that or elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of Germans would not consider themselves as white. And I think just recently they were they were shown, like, or they were told, yes, you are white. So and I say we, like the BIPOC community or whoever, said, okay, so when I'm black and when I'm Asian, then you are white. You're not like invisible. You're not like natural human being. You are white. You are seen or read as white. And a lot of Germans, I think, were offended by it. Like me, I'm not white. What am I? I'm just normal. I don't know. So I think when I was younger, or maybe just let's say 10 years ago, people in Germany, I think, didn't consider themselves white. Nobody said, here are the whites and here are the Asians, or here are the blacks. This is just, there was German and non-German. So we are from here, and where are you from? That was the question, I think. So, I mean, we all are new to this game of racism and discrimination in terms of talking about it, and we all struggle. And I think that's the problem right now in Germany, that we don't have the same level of expressions and communication tools. So there are people who are woke and who talk about BIPOC and talk about white fragility, and this is othering and this is that, and other people are like, what are you talking about? I don't get it. Who's white? Who's what? No, there is no racism. Yeah, but you said potato, so you're doing the same thing, and so we just talking, on different like levels, and this is really annoying and really exhausting, I think. And I think at least in the US or Canada or maybe UK, there is some sort of common ground, to talk about things. I think more than maybe here. I don't know.
Well, I mean, like the flip side of that is because North America has benefited from a much more overt legacy of not only slavery but just general indentured labor, and that actually also exists in Germany, and it exists in Europe. I highly recommend a book called Afropean, which covers a lot of European history and how basically the African continent in so many ways has shaped Europe today and still shapes Europe today. It's just erased. And so I hesitate to say that it's because, the US and Canada are ahead, because again, like, I feel like it's a centering of North American culture that's unnecessary, and we do need to decenter it. And also that every place needs to think about its unequal structures in its own way. And I think this is more obvious in the Asia Pacific than it is in Europe, because in especially Western Europe, they are white-centered societies that were built on very recent colonialism. But in places like the Asia Pacific, you have people who are very dominant who are not white European stock. But you do still have massive legacy, unequal hierarchical structures. And so I think maybe this conversation is not as it's not as different between Germany and the US as it would be in, for example, a place like China or Taiwan or Hong Kong in some ways, even though Hong Kong was a British colony. And so I think that's one of the reasons I think about this so much, because I think about how, for example, I would talk to a Chinese person about this, because in a place like Germany, or in a place like, maybe more like a place like the UK, because again, like you were saying, people who are not white are still not, they don't make up 50% of the population. They don't make up, like in Canada, for example, up to 30%, like very visibly a large part of the population. But for example, if I was to talk to people in China, I'm talking to 90% of the population. So how do you talk to 90% of the population about racism? And then you talk to them about white supremacy, and then they look around and they're like, I don't see a white person around. So how do you extrapolate the ideas of inequality and of racialization and adapt it in a way that is meaningful? And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested to talk to you, Frank, about this, is to understand, like, yeah, where Germany is in this conversation. And also maybe where there might be some concepts or some ideas that are coming out of Germany that maybe the US could learn from or Canada could learn from. Like, I would hope that at some point it's not, just a one-way street as well.
That's an interesting question. What can the US learn from Germany? Yeah. And I think the narrative tells me always do it the other way around, because Germany thinks that the US is more advanced in the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, tools, methods. And that is true, I think, because the conversations are different in this sphere. But if you talk to, let's say, regular white person that you pick from any kind of city, and let's not take Princeton or New York, which is kind of diverse. Let's take any kind of city, just like in Germany, the conversation is just the same. Just because my parents adopted a black child, and they're white, they don't know anything about racism. And the conversations I had with them after the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 were just as hard and tough as I have conversations with participants in anti-racism workshops. So I have a lot of experience doing this in the US, and I have a lot of experience doing this in Germany, and there's no different. There's maybe cultural differences. Germany does not have any ancestries of slaves in the country. There have been African Germans for hundreds of years already, but the visibility, like you said, Athena, it's a different thing. It's much more visible here, and maybe some incidents are more extreme. But the incidents, just because the US is a huge country, but the incidents in Germany are just as extreme. People just don't talk about it. Think about Yuri Yallo and all the other people that haven't served justice until today, but these stories are just not told. Yeah, and you see, we can go on and on about this topic. And there was one question by CW, and I think you answered it before. They said, you mentioned that Canada uses the low bar of the US to defend themselves. My question is, any place desperately damaged by colonization? And that's probably the whole world, right? And Christianization is not extremely racist.
Well, I would reframe that question, and I would challenge that question, because I would say that question is incredibly Eurocentric. Because unfortunately, class hierarchies and racial hierarchies are much older than European exported colonization. And I think I know China best. And then we could also talk about places like India that also have a long history of having social hierarchies. But let's say if we were to talk about China. So China, apart from some of the European concessions, hasn't really been entirely colonized by Western European powers. But we are very, very happily racist. We were very, very proud to overthrow the last Qing Empire, which most people will think of as Chinese, but most Han Chinese will tell you are Manchurians. They're Manchurians who literally lost their own linguistic culture, and their script is still in the Forbidden Palace. But they ruled, which also has its own other issues, but they ruled China for good 400 years. And for some reason, the Chinese were able to remember for all of that time that these people are Manchurians. Same with the Mongols, etc. So I would say that's why I want to widen the conversation and really push people, and especially East Asians, I would say, because East Asians actually have a lot of power, to really reflect on the amount of power we do have. If nothing else, if not monetary, also just sheer population, because there's well over 1.5 billion of us, even just in the Asia Pacific alone, let alone the diaspora.
Yes. Everybody out there, write that down. And we're coming slowly towards the end of this conversation, and I cannot believe it because we scribbled down like tons of questions, and I don't know if we answered all of them, but for me, this conversation has been wonderful. And Athena, before you were talking about what can we learn maybe from different countries, but what can we learn maybe now here in the room from different perspectives? And Frank, maybe you can go first. Do you have any wishes to the people out there who are listening, or to people from the diaspora that you belong to or that you would consider yourself part of? We've been talking a lot about racism, and we talked about privileges, and Athena just mentioned responsibility. And I myself, as a light-skinned Black person, I feel a lot of responsibility because of my privilege, because I live a middle-class life and I have so much access. What would you wish from the people who are listening, and what might be some solutions from your perspective?
So it might sound a little naive, but I'm always coming back to just basic emotions like empathy, or confronting your own fears. Right? I think a lot of people don't realize that racism and prejudices and stereotypes are always connected to your own fears. So why do you fear this person? Why don't you fear this person? Because maybe he looks foreign, or he has a different look that we don't know, a different code, whatever. So it's a lot about fears, and it's a lot about showing humanity, just basic things. So, and I always say that I think a lot of people are maybe less racist than they appear, because they say stupid things, they act in a stupid way, maybe, but like from human being to human being, they might be okay. They might act in a human way. So I think you have to challenge yourself. You have to look in the mirror and say, okay, how can I change? How can I stand for anybody who's not me? Not just fighting for your own privileges or your own people, your own community, but also people who you can do something for, right? So it's the we're all in this together. So I think, like I said, it might sound naive, or it might sound a little like hippie-esque, but it's I think we just have to talk to each other and be open to stuff. And I had my prejudices and stereotypes, and I still have them. And but I try to be open to them and say, okay, maybe I have to ask myself, why do I think like this? Why do I think this way? And why am I afraid of this person and not of this person? So it begins with yourself, and then you go from there.
Yeah, I like that. And you said something, empathy, and I would add compassion. And Alok Menon, they said something very crucial the other day. It was probably just a video snippet out of a bigger conversation. But it was about when people tell you that they feel discriminated against or that they experience something terrible, You don't always have to fully understand. Maybe it's just about having compassion and empathy that somebody is suffering. And if you can be part of the solution and end the suffering by using a certain language or by acting in a certain way that you're capable of, then just don't do it, or just do it and follow this. And I have so many conversations with people who say, no, I just don't do this. And I say, well, people are hurt when you say the N word. People are hurt when you put them in the wrong box. Just like Frank, you mentioned this one example of a little kid saying ni hao to you, and this is just not a match, right? Because you're not Chinese. And these mosquito bites and microaggressions, they hurt because some people experience much more than other people. So don't assume so much. And when people tell you or call you out and say that's not okay, just believe them and try to do it a different way. And don't have the urge to understand fully. You might never do this because you're not in their shoes. Athena, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was taking some notes. Thanks to both of you for giving me a little bit of thinking time. So I think for me, one thing that I would love for all of us to remember, including myself, is that we do, because we are becoming more and more aware of all of these things, like we notice the mosquito bites that you were just mentioning, Ellen. And it becomes a very tough balance of noticing them and rightfully being angry in many ways, and also finding some sort of peace for ourselves, and also remembering that it's not a race to the bottom. You know, just as we're trying to dismantle this hierarchy, it's not to say, oh, I'm the most oppressed, therefore whatever it is, or to try to one up someone else in that. And it is very much about solidarity. And that is also why I raised the point about white adjacency. It's to call out to people to think about what privileges do you have that you can pass on to people who do not have the same privileges. And also, like what you were saying, Frank, you made a good point about giving room for mistakes, because this is a whole process of unlearning and relearning. And even though we can understand the theory, in that split second, I, to this day, will use the wrong words. I can't always manage my tone and it will come out in the wrong way. And so I think, especially in a climate where now we are so wanting to prove that we are good people publicly, that we do need to check our own performances as well, and really, really think about how to be generous with each other and with ourselves as we try to improve for next time. And I would just leave everyone with a resource, the Guide to Allyship, because I think it's really well written. It's one page. If you like rules, there are rules. If you don't like rules, you can read the explanations. It has a comparison to Boots that I think is very nice. And I just encourage all of you to use it, to share it. It's an easy way to summarize a lot of the very big concepts I think that we've been talking about today.
Wow. Yeah, thank you both for sharing your thoughts and being really vulnerable here to have this conversation. And I feel that was not enough time. We just touched the surface, and we might also be still very comfortable in this conversation in a way. Well, there's always room for improvement. And for everybody who's watching, please give us your feedback, what your thoughts are. And there can always be another round. We can meet again and have this conversation or continue this conversation. I would love to do that. But we are already at the end of our conversation. And I would like to give you the floor one more time. And that might be a tough one. But if there are people out there who feel Oh my word, I'm so overwhelmed. Where can I start? I might be a white person and very privileged in the context of racism. I might have class privileges. I might have whatever privilege you have, or you're a light skinned person of color. And I don't know where to start. What would this one advice be? Where can people start? What should this one thing be that they can do after this conversation room? Or let's say, let's start tomorrow. What would this one thing be that you would advise the people to do?
Frank, you look like you're still thinking, so I'll hop in.
Yeah, please.
So I'm going to apologize, Ellen. I think you served it up on a silver platter for me, so I'm going to take it. So you had dropped the link for the Inclusion at Work collection earlier, and I do think it is a good resource, especially, for example, with your explainer, with the LGBTQIA acronym explainer, as well as other decks that people have put together. Coley has also done one. That's great. And I would just say educate yourself. It's okay to start somewhere. It's okay to start with fun as well. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to look for comedy. Yes, a lot of the topics are very heavy, and at the same time, they're human experiences. And for all the people who are overwhelmed, who are sitting there thinking, maybe I do have a lot of privileges, where do I start? I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing. I would say, actually, chill out, just close your mouth, don't talk. And especially when someone else who you know has fewer privileges than you talks, still don't talk. Like they can finish and just let the silence sit and just nod. Because whatever you say might not be the right thing, but the silence and the nodding acknowledges that at least you've received the message and you are giving them space. And that's a very, very good way to start. Just give up the space that you're taking.
I love that. And you should just not say something when you're listening to people who are marginalized or racialized, but don't not talk when other people say something that is not correct. Then you have to speak up and use your privilege. Frank, what is your advice?
I mean, I was just thinking about the same kind of thing, and maybe it's easier just to look around and see, oh, I got this friend who is from dot dot dot, or I never asked him or her about dot dot dot. So just talk to people and ask them questions and listen, and that's what I advise to people, because there are so many people in your area, in your personal life, that you never ask anything, and you don't know, oh, is she Chinese or is she Japanese, or where does she come from, does her parents live, whatever. Just ask and listen, and like Athena said, not not to make it about yourself, not jump in right away and say but. Don't use but. Don't use the but.
I'm not a racist, but
Just listen and learn, and then you have new information, and then you have new things to think about, and yeah, so you grow.
think about that, folks out there. I love that. That was not a short advice, but we have a recording. You can find it on LinkedIn, you can find it on Facebook, you can find it on YouTube. So if anything went too quick, just take your time, watch a recording, recommend the recording to your friends, your co-workers, to your family, and have more conversations about this. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for participating in the chat, asking questions. And Frank and Athena, I'm so thankful for having you here today.
Thank you.
And everyone out there, save the date. Oh, I don't know the date. Sometime in September, there's going to be a German-speaking conversation room about critical masculinity. Yes, we're going to talk about that and why patriarchy is bad for all of us, men, women, non-binary, trans, for everyone out there. This is going to be an exciting conversation as well. So thank you, everyone. This is it for now, and take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.